Hello everybody, my name is Andrew and welcome to a special Zero Camp video about the January 2025 rules update for War Machine. This is our part 4 video in the series, and now we're going to talk about our Dusk Army House Kallyss. Alright, and just to get into it, there's no changes to the spell rack for Dusk like there was with, say, Storm Legion. Not that Crick's had any either, but we're going to hop straight into it. There's quite a few updates here for House Kallyss. The first is that the Dreadguard Cavalry decreases in their cost from cost 12 to an 11. They also lose a range on the Greatsword weapon. They go from a range 12 to a range 1 weapon. Standardizes their threat ranges for both of their weapons. The Dreadguard Slayers increase in cost. They go from cost 7 to cost 8, but they also pick up the Vengeance ability. So this ties into some things that we'll talk about a little bit later with some other House Kallyss models, but you can cast Inviolable Resolve on them. You can give them Shield Guard using the Mage Hunter Commander, and that makes it super easy to proc Vengeance for them. Take a low POW attack coming in, zap a guy for a few boxes, and suddenly the whole unit gets to add 3 inches of move and more melee output, which is just fantastic. So the Eidolon has a lot of changes to go through. This is going to be interesting. Part of the biggest thing to digest with House Kallyss, and I'll talk a little bit more about this at the end too, is that their identity that the game devs wanted them to have in the game was drastically overshadowed by some other things that the faction was able to do. The Eidolon, we see this a lot in here. There is the change to the Future Sight head. It now does True Sight instead. It costs 2 points. Again, we talked about with other armies, the Sentry card is gone, so True Sight just means we have access to it in faction without the card. Both of the shoulder gun options gain the pistol quality, which is a nice quality life change. There's no points increase. It's something that they felt like they were missing anyway, where they just lost output when they got into melee. And now that kind of dials back a little bit. So the left arm force shield model is kind of the first big change to the Eidolon. It increases from 4 to a 5, which now makes the most expensive Eidolon an 18-point model. Both the left arm light null blade and the right arm null blade lose the crit dispel trait and gain just the blessed weapon quality, which can be pretty nice. And then the right arm force fist changes pretty drastically. It increases in cost from 5 to 6, but it goes from range 8 to range 12 on the firearm part, and the POW goes from a 12 to a 13. So it gets a slight bump in POW, a big bump in range. The melee weapon goes from a POW 15 to a POW 14, but the melee weapon on that arm does gain beatback. The last change here is that it kind of swaps where Force Barrier and Arcane Stasis were for the model. It used to be Force Barrier was ahead, Arcane Stasis was on the chassis. Now, however, Arcane Stasis is on ahead and Force Barrier is on the chassis. So now all Eidolon, instead of getting a free upkeep spell on them, are now just harder to hit at ranged. Gast only has one change. This is something that we saw with other armies too. The reposition head becomes cost 2, but it does change from reposition 2 to reposition 3. So that's pretty nice. Hazaroth gets some nice changes here. So Hazaroth's feat now just says you remove damage from all friendly faction extra large and smaller base models in his control range. So anything that is a Void Engine or smaller that has damage heals damage on his feet, assuming they're not grievously wounded or cannot heal for some other reason. This is a nice quality of life change. Now suddenly those Dreadguard Cav, those Dreadguard Archers, those Dreadguard Slayers, your Sire models, your Commander models, your Fun Souls, all of those get healed under feet. And with Revive on Spell Rack, you can just bring dudes back, then pop feet, and suddenly all those boxes are there, which is pretty rude. Additionally, and this is just a fun one, you lose Deathly Domination on the Hellraiser, Hazaroth's melee weapon, and it just picks up Grievous Wounds. Deathly Domination is corner case really good, but straight Grievous Wounds is awesome. Please and thank you. I will take that every day of the week. So Helith gets a change to her feet. Realistically, the only change is that only friendly faction models are impacted by her feet now, not just friendly, as far as the benefit side. Enemy models still suffer -2 Deafen Arm, but only the friendly faction warrior models get +2 Deafen Arm. So that means no more Super Kruger running around the table at Deafen Arm silly. Oh, okay, Scyrafael. I'm not going to lie. When I first saw the changes to Scyrafael, I almost wept. As someone who's been playing quite a bit of Dusk, I ran Scyrafael in pretty much every list. Seeing that Scyrafael didn't lose any points or a decrease in cost, but lost range on both melee and ranged attacks, it was a tough pill to swallow at first. I'll talk about it more when I talk about my overall thoughts for this. This isn't bad. It's not bad for the game. I actually think this is pretty good for the game. It's just a tough thing to have to work around. Again, because the faction's identity, a lot of folks were tying it up in Scyrafael, and that's not, I think, what the game devs wanted. Oh, Scyrafael. Oh.
Look how they massacred my boy.
So when I first saw the Scyrafael changes, like Scyrafael, I was kind of taken aback. As someone who's been playing Dusk, Scyrafael change is pretty drastic. Realistically, there's 3 big changes to her. 1, her feat no longer knocks down models it damages. That's a really big change, because now suddenly you're not ruining entire units of, like, say, Brine Blood Marauders, who you damage one, it knocks down, and it's dead because it's knocked down and not tough anymore. You still push if you don't damage on the feat, which is a big deal because it's still only a POW 10. But the other 2 changes are probably more significant for her. She replaces Doomsayer, so 1 spell, and Telekinesis, a 2nd signature spell, instead with Gravewind and Rhythm of War. This is going to change pretty drastically how she plays. No longer is she just the silly ranged threat extender caster. I'm not Arcane Propulsioning Scyrafael. I'm not TKing Scyrafael after potentially hot swapping Mirage to have a 14 to 16 inch threatening melee jack. I still haven't quite figured out what it is that she does want to play per se, but it definitely goes into what I was saying earlier, where the faction identity that the game devs wanted was being overshadowed by some things that they had out there, and this is definitely one of those things. So the Secret Adepts change, it's a change to Exorcism specifically, so we'll see this again in the Orgoth Sea Raiders section. But essentially it says you can target cohort models. Not a big deal specifically for Secret Adepts. The cohort models that are available are just Warjacks, but it matters more later for other models again in Sea Raiders. Soulless Hunters changed quite a bit. So the Soulless Hunters lost their combined ranged attack and instead gained Concentrated Fire. So Concentrated Fire is a rule that says it grants a cumulative +1 bonus to ranged damage rolls for each other model in the unit that has hit an enemy with a range attack this activation. It now means if you can debuff defense, which you have ways to do that a little bit inside the faction, you can have some pretty insane damage output on models. And it doesn't have to be shots against the same target. Model 1 in my Soulless Hunters can shoot, say, a Tempest Thunder, and then Model 2 can, say, shoot a Corsair. And that second guy, as long as the first guy hit the Thunderer, I get a +1 to damage rolls against the Corsair. So that sounds pretty good to me. And so Tyrus Nis Arcere of Spiders. So Tyrus changes in a very similar way to Health. His feat only affects friendly faction models, not just all friendlies. Again, we're not sliding Kruger around the table. We're not giving him Ghostly and placing him now. So no more of that silliness. So Valus changes a little bit now. Her Threads of Life ability and her Avenging Spirit form both change, but the Threads of Life now only affects, surprise, friendly faction living non-warrior models. Ooh, that's a mouthful. It's that same continuing trend at this point that I can just officially say it's not the faction of look at how cool Kruger is anymore. Her Avenging Spirit goes from arm 14 to arm 12, so it's a little bit easier to kill. And her Touch of the Grave melee weapon decreases in power from a 14 to a 12, but it's still pretty strong. Also, Valus's toolkit doesn't change. It just makes her a little less potentially murdery after she dies. With the Void Engine, there's not a lot to say. It just goes from cost 7 to cost 8. The Void Shaper, however, does get a pretty significant rework. They go from cost 4 to cost 2. They decrease their rat from a 7 to a 6, and they go from 8 damage boxes to 5. They also lose the Shadowbind ability on their Shadow Matrix range weapon. Again, I think this figures into the whole faction identity thing. They were 4-point solos to just try to hand out Shadowbind, whereas now you're going to use Tune Up and Recalibrate. And then lastly, while there was no change to the Void Engine except the point cost, the whites changed just a little bit as well, which does directly impact the Void Engines, where the whites that the Void Engine produces have their melee attacks go from range 2 on the Void Strike to range 1. So with House Kallyss, this is probably going to be the toughest to talk about the faction as a whole and what the January 2025 updates mean for them. Mostly because, as I've mentioned a few times, the biggest thing is that their faction identity was kind of the big question here. Throughout 2024, I'm sure most folks, especially those who are trying to follow, like, say, other podcasts, other content, anything to do with, like, say, which list dominated in national and international tournaments, Dusk had two big issues, which was, one, they could just shoot Scyrafael across the table. Holy cow. The fact that you could just put flight on this bad boy, you had Ghost Walk, you had Mirage on Wreck, you had ways to deliver Scyrafael in places that made it uncomfortable. And while that in and of itself isn't a bad thing, that was about the only thing in the faction's identity except their ability to turn Big Pig and Kruger up to just 11. The fact that a lot of their abilities now only impact friendly faction models means that they're not going to be helping out Big Pig or Kruger as much. Debuffs are still amazing for both of them. But also we see, especially with Scyrafael and the changes to Scyrafael, that the faction is no longer just about how do I deliver Scyrafael across the table. You now have, I think, more of what the devs were looking for, which was the ability to say, take a punch and then counterpunch. Things like Hazaroth's feet, just healing everybody, is a big step in that direction. Otherwise, while we'd like to see a Rising Tide lift all ships, one of the things I will say for this is that Scyrafael was up here and brought her down closer to the same level as the other casters. So now it doesn't just feel like Scyrafael is part of every Dusk pair that we're going to see at tournaments. It's not going to be part of every list ever. We're going to see more variety in Dusk lists. They're still a good faction. They still have a lot of power. They still have a lot of oomph. Their spell rack is still disgusting, people. It's gross. I just think it's going to take a while for the meta to figure out how to play Dusk without just relying on the crutch that is Scyrafael. That being said, that is the end of our House Kallyss bit. So thank you all for watching. We are now going to move into the next part. We're going to be moving on to part 5, the Winter Core. So if you've stuck around for this, please feel free to watch the Winter Core video and the other ones that come after it. Please like, subscribe, share, let your friends know that we're doing this. We're trying to spread the good word of War Machine, and we're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers on YouTube, so that way YouTube has to pay us to make content, not you guys. So thank you all so much. We hope to catch you with the next video and our next stream. Oh, it's a stream kitty. Hi, buddy. Oh, this is an outtake because I don't want to deny the internet. Yep, this is the stream kitty. Hey, Bubba, say hi. He's a little bit camera shy, but he's been pestering me all throughout the video. So this is a little bit of bonus content here, but we have a stream cat. He just doesn't show up because we don't normally stream at home. All right, buddy, say goodbye. Thanks for watching.